The house had always been quiet in a comforting way until the silence began to mean something else. It wasn't peace anymore. It was the sound of things left unsaid, of looks that lingered too long, of footsteps that stopped just short of the wrong door. The son noticed first. He always did. The way she avoided his father's eyes, the way her laughter sounded rehearsed at dinner, and how her phone was always turned face down on the table. One evening, as rain pressed against the windows, he came home earlier than expected. From the hallway, he heard a voice, hers, soft, low, trembling in a way he'd never heard before. Another voice answered, a man's voice. It wasn't his father's. The sound struck him like a slap. He stood frozen, every word from behind that door cutting through him like glass. He didn't push the door open that night. Instead, he backed away slowly, feeling his pulse pound in his throat, realizing that everything he believed about his family was suddenly fragile, false, and fading. Days turned into weeks, but he said nothing. The father, oblivious, moved around the house humming as he fixed the broken shelves, cooked breakfast, or folded laundry beside her. She played along well, her smile painted, her tone warm, but sometimes her gaze drifted to a corner of the room as though haunted by something she couldn't shake off. The son watched her carefully. He memorized every lie that touched her lips, every trembling hand that reached for a coffee mug. When he finally decided to confront her, he didn't choose the night or the right words, he simply couldn't carry it anymore. She was alone in the kitchen, cleaning a glass. He spoke her name softly, and when she turned, the look in her eyes said she already knew. How long? He asked. She froze, her hand tightening on the glass. The air between them was thick with guilt and dread. It was a mistake, she whispered. But he didn't believe her. A mistake didn't last for months. A mistake didn't destroy a man who trusted her completely. He wanted to tell his father. He wanted to scream it out loud. But each time he looked at the older man, so gentle, so tired, so proud of the family he thought he had, his throat locked. So he chose a quieter form of revenge. He began to withdraw, letting her feel his coldness, his contempt. He made her live in the shadow of her own fear. When she tried to speak to him, he turned away. When she reached for him, he stepped back. Her guilt became visible, dripping from her like sweat. One morning, the father noticed the tension. What's going on between you two? He asked. Neither answered. The son couldn't bring himself to break the man's heart, and she couldn't confess without shattering the last bit of her disguise. The father sighed, shaking his head, believing it was just another argument. He went to work, leaving behind a house filled with silence so loud it felt like it might burst. That afternoon, the son followed her. He watched her meet the man at a small cafe near the edge of town. He saw her hand brush the other man's, saw her eyes soften, saw everything he wished he hadn't. He took a picture, just one, and sent it to her phone without a word. He waited outside, hidden, as she looked down at her screen and went pale. The other man asked something, but she couldn't answer. She left abruptly, her steps quick and uneven. That night, she came to him, her face streaked with tears. Please, she begged, don't tell him. I'll end it. I swear I'll end it. He looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of hatred and pity. You already ended it, he said coldly. You just don't know it yet. The father never found out the truth. But the house never healed. The son's silence became its own punishment, for both of them. She lived with the weight of what she'd done, every day facing the son who knew too much. who looked at her not as family but as a stranger who had stolen something sacred. And he, in his quiet revenge, learned that some betrayals can't be undone, not even by vengeance. In that house the silence returned once more. But this time, it wasn't comforting. It was the echo of a family that had already fallen apart, pretending not to notice. The days that followed were unbearable. The son no longer spoke unless necessary, and when he did, his voice carried a distance that pierced deeper than anger ever could. The woman moved through the house like a ghost, her steps careful, her smiles forced, her eyes never meeting his. The father sensed the shift but mistook it for adolescence, for mood swings, for something that would pass. He didn't see the way the son's gaze hardened each time she brushed past, or how her hands trembled when she poured his coffee. At night, she often stood at the sink long after dinner, staring out the window at the dark yard. The reflection that stared back at her wasn't hers anymore. It was someone else, someone who had crossed a line she could never uncross. She thought about confessing, about falling to her knees and begging for forgiveness. But she couldn't bear the thought of seeing the father's face collapse under the weight of it. So she said nothing. Silence became her refuge and her punishment. The son couldn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes, the touch of her hand on another man's arm, her soft laughter, the lies she had whispered. He hated that part of him still cared. He hated that his anger wasn't clean, that beneath it was confusion and sorrow. Sometimes, when he heard her crying in the next room, something twisted inside him. But he stayed still. She didn't deserve comfort, not from him. One evening, the father announced they would have dinner together, like old times. The woman forced a smile, and the son nodded wordlessly. The meal was suffocating. The father talked about work, about plans for a family trip, about small things that didn't matter. The son couldn't take his eyes off her hands, how they shook when she lifted the fork, how she avoided the father's gaze. Then, her phone vibrated on the counter. She froze. So did he. The father looked up, oblivious, asking lightly, "A message?" The son stood abruptly. "I'll get it," he said, moving toward the counter before she could. He picked up the phone, the screen lighting up with a name he didn't recognize but knew all too well. Her breath caught, but it was too late. The father saw the name too. He frowned, confused, turning to her. "Who's that?" he asked. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The son didn't speak either. He just handed her the phone and walked out, leaving behind the spark that would burn everything. Later that night, he heard shouting, his father's voice, filled with disbelief and rage, breaking into fragments. Her voice followed, desperate, pleading, useless. A door slammed. The sound of something crashing echoed down the hall. The son sat on his bed, staring at the wall, feeling his revenge twist into something darker. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like loss. The next morning, the father was gone. His clothes, his car, his presence, vanished into a silence thicker than before. The woman sat at the table, eyes swollen, hands clasped tightly around a cup she didn't drink from. When the son entered the kitchen, she looked up at him, her expression hollow. "You told him," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He wanted to deny it, but there was no point. He deserved to know, he said. She nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And what about you? What do you deserve?" He didn't answer. He turned away, walking toward the door. The house, once filled with love and noise, now felt empty, just walls and memories. As he stepped outside, the cold air hit him, sharp and unforgiving. He thought he'd feel relief. Instead, he felt only the ache of something broken that could never be repaired. Inside, she sat alone at the table, her reflection in the window trembling with each breath. She had betrayed the man who loved her. And the son who once trusted her had become her executioner. Both punishments fit. Both were unbearable. The father didn't come back that week. His absence filled the house like fog, dense, silent, impossible to ignore. The woman tried calling him at first, leaving messages that went unanswered. Each one shorter and shakier than the last. The son listened to her voice echo through the rooms, flat and desperate. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His silence told her everything. She began sleeping on the couch, unable to bear the emptiness of their shared bed. Some nights she stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, waiting for a sound that never came. The son could hear her from his room, the soft sobs muffled behind her hands. The quiet apologies whispered to no one. He wanted to stop caring. He told himself she deserved every ounce of pain that came her way. But when he saw her one morning sitting at the table, still wearing the same clothes as yesterday, he realized something inside him had changed. He had wanted to punish her, but now it just felt like watching someone drown. When the father finally returned, it was without a word. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just walked in, picked up a few things, and told her he needed space. The son stood by the doorway, watching as the older man avoided both their eyes. "Take care of yourself," the father said quietly to the woman, his tone cold but tired. Then he left again, leaving behind the faint smell of rain and motor oil. For a long time, neither mother nor son moved. The woman's hands trembled as she touched the empty air where he had stood. Then she turned toward the son. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said softly. "But you haven't. You've lost him too." He didn't respond. He just stared at her, and for a moment, he almost saw the person she used to be, the warmth she had once carried, the kindness she used to show. Then it flickered out, replaced by exhaustion and shame. Days bled into each other. The woman began cleaning the house obsessively, scrubbing every surface as though she could erase what had happened. The son avoided her, spending long hours outside, wandering the streets, sitting in the park with his headphones on. But no matter how far he went, the image of her stayed with him, her pale face, her trembling hands, her hollow eyes. One afternoon, he came home to find her in the kitchen, sorting through a box of old photographs. She looked up when he entered, startled, like she'd been caught stealing something. "I was just cleaning," she murmured. The photos lay scattered across the table, wedding pictures, birthdays, family trips. In one of them, the three of them were smiling, the father's arm around her, her hand resting gently on the son's shoulder. The sight made something tighten in his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, caught off guard. "Every day," she said. "But regret doesn't change what's done." He studied her face. For the first time, he saw not a villain, but a person who had destroyed herself as much as anyone else. The anger that had fueled him began to fade, leaving behind only a quiet, aching emptiness. "He's not coming back," the son said. "I know." Her voice broke. "But I'll wait anyway." That night, the son stood outside her door for a long moment, listening to her breathing, slow, unsteady. Then he turned and went back to his room. He lay awake, realizing that revenge hadn't brought him peace. It had only deepened the silence. In the morning, the woman was gone. The house was spotless, eerily calm, with a note left on the table. It said nothing of goodbye or guilt, just one line: "Take care of your father." He read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what had been lost, not just trust, not just family, but something deeper, the fragile hope that love could ever survive betrayal. Weeks passed, and the house remained empty of her. Dust began to gather on the furniture she used to polish every morning. The plants she had watered began to wilt. And the kitchen, once filled with the smell of her cooking, now carried only the faint scent of neglect. The son lived in the same silence she had left behind. But it no longer felt like revenge. It felt like consequence. He tried to focus on ordinary things, school, work, anything that would fill the hours, but her absence followed him everywhere. Sometimes he thought he saw her figure reflected in windows or heard her humming from another room. Guilt began to creep in slowly, quietly, until it settled beside him like an unwanted companion. He had wanted her gone, and now she was. But the victory tasted bitter. The father returned one afternoon without warning. He looked older, thinner, carrying the kind of silence that comes from too many sleepless nights. The son met him at the door, unsure what to say. "She left," he said finally. The father nodded, as if he already knew. He walked through the house slowly, touching familiar things: the edge of the table, the corner of a picture frame, the couch where she used to sit reading. That evening, they ate together for the first time in weeks. The father spoke little, his eyes distant. When the son finally asked where he had been, the man just said, trying to understand. Then, after a long pause, he added, "and failing." The son wanted to tell him everything that he had known long before, that he had been the one to expose her, but the words wouldn't come. The confession stuck in his throat. There was no right time to admit that his revenge had broken not only her, but him too. So he stayed quiet. Late that night, he found the father sitting in the dark living room, staring at a framed photograph of the three of them. "Do you still love her?" the son asked softly. The father didn't look up. "I don't know what to call it," he said. "Maybe love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. Turns into something heavier." The son sat across from him. "She left a note," he murmured, pulling the small folded paper from his pocket and handing it over. The father opened it, his eyes moving slowly over the single line. "Take care of your father." He exhaled shakily, his voice barely above a whisper. "She always worried about you," he said, even when she shouldn't have. For a long time, neither spoke. The clock ticked softly in the background. Eventually, the father said, "You don't have to hate her for me." "I don't," the son replied. "Not anymore." They sat there until dawn, the light creeping slowly through the curtains. The house felt different that morning, still heavy, still scarred, but no longer suffocating. There was grief, but there was also a strange, fragile calm. Days later, the son found himself driving along the road that led out of town. The same one she might have taken when she left. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe closure. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe just proof that she still existed somewhere beyond the wreckage of what they'd been. He didn't find her, but as he stood by the roadside, watching the horizon blur into the afternoon haze, he realized that revenge had never been about justice. It had been about pain, his, hers, his father's, and how they had all fed it until it consumed them. When he returned home that evening, he placed the note on the mantel beside the family photo. For the first time, he didn't feel anger looking at her face. just sadness, and the faintest trace of something almost like understanding. The silence in the house was still there, but it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like memory, one that would never fade, but might, one day, hurt a little less. Spring came slowly that year. The days stretched longer, the air turned softer. And yet the house remained caught in its own still winter. The father spent his mornings in the garden, quietly tending to the plants she had once loved, though most of them had withered. The son watched from the window, wondering what kept the man going when everything they'd built had already fallen apart. He began helping him, at first out of obligation, then out of something else. Working side by side in silence became a form of language neither of them had to explain. They didn't talk about her anymore, but she was there in everything. In the patch of soil the father watered too much, in the porch light he still left on at night. One evening, the father handed him a small envelope. Inside was a letter, the handwriting unmistakably hers. The postmark was from a nearby town. The son's heart tightened as he read, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm trying to start again, somewhere quiet. I hope you both can too." He stared at the words for a long time. The father said nothing, just watched him. "She's alive," the son whispered, as if saying it out loud might make it real. The father nodded. "That's enough for me." That night the son couldn't sleep. He thought about all the things he had wanted, to punish her, to protect his father, to make someone pay for what he couldn't fix. Now, none of it seemed to matter. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only exhaustion and the hollow echo of what used to be love. Weeks passed before the next letter arrived. This one was shorter. "I think of you both often. The pain hasn't gone away, but it's quieter now. I hope yours is too." The father read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. The son wanted to ask if he would ever see her again, but he didn't. Some questions only reopened wounds that had just begun to scar. Instead, he focused on small things, the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of the father's footsteps, the quiet evenings spent on the porch. Life had shrunk into something simpler, but it was livable. It was enough. One rainy afternoon, he found the father sitting with an old photo album. "Do you ever wish she'd come back?" the son asked. The man smiled faintly, his eyes tired but calm. "No," he said. "I just hope she finds peace. That's all any of us can do." The son nodded. For the first time, he understood. Love didn't always survive betrayal, it simply changed form, settling into memory, into quiet acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but something close. That night, he wrote his own letter. He didn't send it. He didn't even sign it. He just wrote, "I don't hate you anymore. I hope you find the life you couldn't have here." Then he folded it and placed it in the same drawer as hers. When the rain stopped, the garden bloomed again. New shoots pushed through the soil, stubborn and green. The father smiled when he saw them, and for once, the son smiled too. The house would never be what it was, but it no longer needed to be. It carried its ghosts quietly, as people do when they've survived something that once defined them. And though her voice was gone, though her shadow no longer crossed their walls, a part of her still lingered, not as pain, but as proof that even broken love can leave behind something living. Years passed before her name was spoken again. Time had softened everything, the edges of the pain, the echo of the shouting, the weight of the silence. The father grew older, his hands slower, his face lined with the quiet grief of someone who had learned to live with absence. The son became a man, building a life outside the house, yet returning often, as if tied to the place by invisible threads. The house had changed. The garden was alive again, the air smelled of soil and lavender, and the walls no longer carried the sharpness of memory. But sometimes, when dusk settled and the light turned golden, the past would stir, like dust rising in a quiet room. One evening, the son found the father sitting on the porch with a faded envelope in his lap. "It came today," the older man said. The handwriting was familiar, softer now, a little uncertain. Inside was a letter, longer than the others. "I don't know if this should reach you. I've lived quietly these years by the sea. I still wake sometimes thinking I hear your voice, or his laughter from the kitchen. I don't want to come back. I just want you to know that leaving was the only way I could stop destroying what I loved." They read it together without speaking. The father's hand trembled slightly as he folded the letter back into the envelope. "She was never evil," he said finally. "Just weak in a moment she couldn't undo." The son nodded slowly. He didn't argue. Time had already rewritten everything that needed to be said. "Do you ever miss her?" he asked. "Every day," the father admitted. "But missing someone isn't the same as wanting them back." That night, the son took a walk to the old park at the edge of town, the same place he used to escape to when the house had been unbearable. He sat on the same bench, feeling the cool airbrush against his skin, and thought about the woman he once hated. He tried to remember her not as the betrayer, but as the person who had tried and failed to love them both in her own flawed way. For the first time, he could. When he returned home, the father was asleep, the letter resting beside him on the table. The son picked it up, read it once more, and quietly placed it inside the photo album that held the last picture of them together. The three of them, smiling, unbroken, frozen in a moment before everything fell apart. He closed the album gently and stood by the window. Outside, the garden shimmered under the moonlight, the same one she used to tend with careful hands. Life had gone on, as it always does, reshaping around what was lost. Years later, when the father passed away, the son found himself standing alone in that same garden. He buried the last letter beneath the old tree, beside a single white flower she had planted long ago. It felt right, an ending that wasn't vengeance or forgiveness, just peace. He stayed there until the sun began to rise, the light spilling across the quiet house. For the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted. He felt grateful to have known love, even broken, to have survived its shattering, to have found, at last, a kind of mercy in the ruins. And as the morning light touched the walls, he thought he could almost hear her voice again, soft, fading, carried by the wind, whispering not apology, not regret, but something gentler. The sound of letting go.